Now we can go on with the squash and stretch and adding a shadow. Let's begin it just like we did the others by duplicating the current animation, naming a new layer called Anim4, and we're going to select the frames here and drag them with the Alt key held down so that they're duplicated, lock the original layer, turn on Edit Multiple Frames, make sure that our selection for those multiple frames is around the entire length of the selection, but we do need to click and drag to make sure everything's selected, and then move them over, holding down the Shift key to make sure that they stay together, and then we can turn off the Edit Multiple Frames and we're ready to animate again. Now that we have the same exact animation here, now what happens as the object is moving down, it will squash or it will stretch out. So we typically want to stretch this up a little bit and squish it in a little bit. And the reason we squish it in is because the volume has to stay the same. Now you'll notice that changed the point where it contacts. So I'm going to move that up now a little bit so it's hitting the point. We might adjust that just a little bit more. Maybe not quite so dramatic. But you'll now see that it stretches. But it doesn't look quite right. And the reason why is because when it hits the bottom, it actually needs to squish the opposite way to create this look only sideways. So what we need to do is move this keyframe back once, duplicate it over to the right, and then duplicate it one more into the center, and then we're going to change the center keyframe so that it has the squish in the opposite direction. So now, that's our finished animation. Now we do need to make sure that we change our ease just to make sure that that is set to 100 again, because sometimes that doesn't get duplicated correctly. But now if we watch that animation, you'll see we've got some sort of squish at the bottom, or squash at the bottom. And that's a really important principle for the animation, that you need to have that exaggeration. You can see a slight difference between the two of them. Now we're going to duplicate that one more time. So this will be Anim5. Duplicate that over. Now we can lock the layer, turn on our Edit Multiple Frames, select everything, move it over to the right. And we've got our new animation, so we can turn off our Edit Multiple Frames. We've got everything moved over. Now with Animation 5, we're going to create a new layer, and this is going to be for a shadow. So I'm going to put it underneath Anim5. Shadow. And I'll even call it Anim5 Shadow, just so it has a nice name. And we're going to be making a shadow so that as the ball goes down, it creates a shadow on the floor that is visible and then kind of becomes invisible, of course, as it goes up. So I'm going to begin by creating a very simple black oval with no stroke. Let's just take a look at that real quick. Looks like I have a gradient in there, and I don't really need that. I just need that to be about where it is. So that looks pretty good. Now we're going to need to turn that shadow into a symbol. So that'll be a shadow. And I'm going to make sure at the very bottom it's precisely in the center. Now we can do an effect such as the blur. And we can maybe set its quality a little bit higher. And what will happen is, as we get to the actual point of contact, that blur may become actually less. So here's where the object is hitting the floor. And that looks pretty decent. So I'm going to take that keyframe and put it right there in the center. Now I'm going to duplicate that back a little bit, and I guess at this point I should actually change it. So it's not a bad idea for me to change the alpha to 0 at this point. And also I'm going to make the blur just a little bit larger. Now if I right-click and choose Create Classic Tween, you'll see that that shadow kind of comes up there. Now I just need to duplicate that frame over, and then right after it, insert a blank keyframe. Oops, and I can remove that tween. Seems somehow I accidentally copied the tween too. Right-click, choose Insert Frame. Let's see. Looks like I'm just off a little bit. So I might need to move things over, insert that blank keyframe, so I have everything the same length each time. So you can see we now have a shadow. You know, getting that shadow to look just right, that takes a little bit of doing. Might be that it needs to be just a little bit more subtle. It's not perfect, but it works. Let's see. I'm going to come back to this point right here, actually, and take that off even more. It's hard to play with these and get them exactly right. So you can kind of see that kind of works as a shadow. But now we've got our basic tweens, our basic classic tweens, our basic motion tweens, classic tweens, ease in and ease out, squash and stretch, and adding a shadow, which are all very different versions of creating realism for your bouncing ball tutorial. Now what we're going to do in the next tutorial is look at moving our animations into separate timelines and adding our code in order to start and stop them. So go save your work and go on.